Welcome to the Money Matters podcast, brought to you by American Consumer Credit Counseling. Our goal is to provide you with the knowledge and tools to achieve a healthier financial life. My name is Marijke and I'm ACCC's Community Outreach Supervisor. I coordinate our financial education and outreach programs, and at the end of each month, we host a live webinar. In today's Money Matters podcast, we're going to be expanding on our July Job Loss Survival Guide podcast to take a deeper look into budgeting on a reduced income. I'm happy to welcome my ACCC colleague, Kyle to today's episode. Feel free to check out more of our previous webinars on our YouTube channel. You can find us by typing American Consumer Credit Counseling in the search bar. There will also be links in the description. So welcome everybody, and this is our follow-up from the Job Loss Survival Guide. And so what I've done today is I have brought in one of our credit counselors by the name of Kyle, and we are going to continue the conversation about the Job Loss Survival Guide, Tools for Resiliency and Recovery. And my name is Marijke, and I'm the Community Outreach Supervisor here at ACCC. And we're just going to have a quick conversation because this is my colleague, and he has a lot of points that he's going to bring up both professionally and personally when looking at really how do you budget? How do you go from, say, a double income in a family to a single income? And that's really what we want to talk about today. So Kyle, welcome. If you want to introduce yourself a little bit about your experience here at ACCC.
Sure. Yeah. Again, my name's Kyle. I've been here for 13 years come Halloween, because I'll never forget my hire date whenever I have to write it down because everyone was in costume. I've been a counselor for many years, and in the last few years, I've switched to a more admin position, but I love what I do, and I see myself being here for many moons further.
So Kyle, you have, through all of your experience and all of your years here with ACCC, you have really talked to thousands of people who have experienced job loss and job reduction. And many of those people calling in are really struggling with their budgets, or they're really struggling because they're putting a lot of their living expenses onto credit cards, and they're really begin to get high debt and really struggling to pay that down. Can you talk to us a little bit about kind of when you get, what are some of the common experiences you hear from people and stressors from people when they call in?
Yeah, they definitely put a lot of expenses on credit cards when they lose an income. And I think the one thing that I see a lot that I used in my own life when about a year ago when my wife lost her job was we didn't do that urge of let's put everything on credit cards, because I think a lot of people they're still like, oh, I lost a good chunk of our income, but let's continue to do everything that we're doing. I feel like the first thing that you should do, which within the first 48 hours, my wife and we sat down with our budget and we go, okay, let's look at this. Let's take out your income and how do things look? And they don't look good. They usually don't. And that's probably not just for me, but for everybody. And it's just sitting there saying, okay, what can we kind of adjust or cut back on? Because again, I think the biggest mistake is people are like, oh, I'm part of this club, or I'm doing these extracurricular activities and I'm going to continue to do them without the income and rack it up on my credit cards, when it's the mentality should be maybe these are the first things that should go, but know that, life can get better and you can always bring them back into the fold.
Right. And I think one of the things from the webinar that really struck me, talking to Melissa Vining from Mass Hire Downtown Boston, was a lot of people walk into like a job loss situation and they think it's going to be a couple weeks before they get a new job. And I think a lot of people don't realize the reality that sometimes job loss can be a couple months. And so they think that they can just kind of continue with kind of the status quo with kind of their expenses, and that they'll be able to kind of find something and kind of fill that in a little bit, catch up afterwards. But one of the big things that I took away from the webinar was that it was really a longer process. And like you said, sitting down within that 48-hour period, or really within that short time period, knowing that you will apply for unemployment and be able to get some of those benefits to help support. But that, the main piece, I think, sitting down with the budget is really understanding what are your basic housing and living expense needs. We talk a lot about needs versus wants. And really understanding like what's that basic thing that basic amount that you need to cover each month to make sure that rent or a mortgage or car payments or house or food or whatever else it would be that are just, it's not the things that you want, but it's the things that you need. And then sitting down, one of the things we really encourage is people sitting down and looking at their current debt level to make sure that they're on top of their debt payments. And then, like you had said, I remember when we had spoken about this before, you and your wife really had very clear conversations about what things you were going to cut out and how you were going to do that. And I remember you saying, like, you didn't realize, you hadn't really calculated until you sat down and did like a number by number budget, where how much both of you spent on Dunkin' Donuts
Oh yeah.
breakfast and coffee every month.
Yeah, and for our listeners, we're based out of Massachusetts, so we run on Duncan here. We run on Duncan here. But no, you're absolutely right, and I won't be ashamed to say, when my wife had her old job, we were living pretty comfortably. I would recommend trying to review a budget immediately. The only reason it took us 48 hours is my wife was in Canada visiting her sister on vacation when she got laid off, which that's just the cherry on top of the situation. But yeah, no, I agree. Definitely looking into, what can you take out and things of that nature and realizing when you sit down and you are 100% right too on it takes a while. I mean,
Mhm.
I back in the day, I got lucky when I was younger working the retail. I went from having one job at GameStop and then I got another job at Blockbuster within 2 days, if y'all remember Blockbusters, because of my knowledge in games. But in today's economy, it took my wife a little over 2 months because though within those 48 hours, not only are we doing our budget and she's looking at jobs and filling out applications, but then they call you and then they schedule the interview. And a lot of places now they do a second interview or a third interview. And that's just days ticking by where you don't know what that income's going to be. And I think what's also important in the situation is once you find that, it's important to look at the budget when you lose that income, but then it's also doubly important to look at the budget again once you find that income. So it's one thing when my wife lost her job, but then when she found a new job, she was making 20,000 less a year, which is massive. So then we had to then look and say, okay, what things could we bring back into the budget or what things can we just cut back on? And like you said, you look and you see like we're really spending too much on, Dunkin's or we have 8,000 streaming services now. What can we cut back on and things of that nature. And for us, and I think it's very important as well, is when you go from a kind of comfortable lifestyle, and we have an 8-year-old, to bring your children into it as well and just kind of explain to them. Because as a counselor, what I saw all the time was people barely making ends meet or they're not putting a whole lot of, getting food, but then they're doing piano lessons or horseback. Right? And it's one of those like as a kid I went through with my adults, but my parents told me like, hey, you're gonna miss baseball this season, but we need food. We need to have this roof over our heads. And then, when things got better, I went back to baseball. It was great. I wasn't good at it, but I enjoyed it. Yeah, I feel like the key is you got to do that budget when the job loss happens to see what you can do, and then once you get that job again or some type of income, look at the budget now and say, okay, are we still good? Does one of us need to get a part-time job? Things of that nature. And then, of course, if you have especially kids, just bring them into the conversation. That's widely important.
Right. Because it's one of those pieces that, any kind of a job loss within a couple situation or especially within a family situation, the instinct is to protect and to kind of make things kind of seem okay. But as any of us know who have kids or have worked with kids are much smarter and they really know what's going on. And the more you try to kind of not talk about it and not kind of let them know, the more unsettling it feels. Where sometimes I think with kids like you did with your son, you sat down and said, here's what happened. We have a plan. Everything's going to be okay, but
Hmm.
life is going to change a little bit. You might not you might not be able to go to baseball, or we might not be able to do these kinds of things that we used to do, but everything will be okay. We're going to make sure you're safe. That level of like understanding, I think, is hugely important for kids.
Definitely. And it also opened our eyes to, where I'm located in the Worcester, Massachusetts area. I'm a big book guy, so I love going to the library, but then also seeing what type of events your town puts on or free events that your city puts on. Because if you're worried about like, we don't have all this money to do these cool things with the kids now, depending on where you live, like your town or city might be putting on things that are free admission, low cost. And every time we do one of these, my son has a ball and it's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's that idea of, we talked a little bit about food. We love you and your donkeys and stuff and kind of making those decisions of like eating in more than eating out, that idea of kind of getting groceries rather than takeaway. Those are some kind of considerations. And then on the other side, one of the big expenses that we see that we really know people can begin to cut out, not only for job loss situations like this, but if they have particular savings goals or there's things that they're looking for down the line, that really having that really close look at your subscriptions, your streaming services, all of your entertainment. And, Kyle and I, we are big book people and we have a great love of public libraries. I always, whenever I talk about the, budgeting and cutting expenses in my financial education presentations, I always say, check out your local library. Because as Kyle had said, it's not just books anymore. There's so many. You can get streaming services, audiobooks, and there's a lot of events, free events and activities through your local library. So
yeah,
definitely.
they also do in the Worcester Library, you can get museum passes as well, which is awesome because my son loves art. Going back to what you mentioned with like the food and stuff, especially in today's economy, as we all know with the so cheap cost of groceries right now. I know most parents, friends that I know, like most of us either have a giant calendar or we have a big whiteboard where we're like, okay, we have, this on this day, this on this day, kid has this on this day. What I found that really works if you're trying to stick to a budget, especially when it comes to food, plan out your meals and then write the meal, like especially for dinners, because that's like usually in my household, the big meal of the day. Write them down on the calendar. And for us, we stick to that. So when we go to the grocery store, we just buy those because let's face it, how many times do we all go to the grocery store? We buy things and then a few weeks we're opening the fridge and we're like, well, that's bad and now that's bad. And you're just throwing dollars in the trash. But if you plan it out, then you're good to go as far as that goes and sticking to it. It can be tough to stick to it, but then again, I always bring it back to the family dynamic. Like we're in this as a team. So if I realize that my wife's starting to falter, I'll have her, I'll be there to cheer her up. If she knows that I'm starting to, she kind of cheers me up. And then our adorable kid, he's just always there to be like, you guys are the best. Love you. We're like, yeah.
Bring everybody into the conversation. That's the biggest piece, I think.
I agree.
The big takeaways, I think, from, this conversation that, as an extension of our job loss survival guide, we really wanted to unpack kind of how to tackle the budget and how to tackle that kind of lowered or reduced income. So really just sit down with your budget and go through it, really fine tune and begin to look at those items that you can cut away. Again, eat smarter, think about doing meal planning, have a really serious look at your entertainment, whether it's, as Kyle had said, things that your child is doing, events that they're doing, or subscription services or streaming services. Really look at all of those areas that you can cut away to make sure that you're protecting, your housing, your transportation, that food is on the table, that everybody has what they need, and that you're not building your debt up. And that you are able to then really focus on that job search, which, as we said, can really take a couple months. And, based on the webinar that we talked about is, a lot of people do it on their own, like, Kyle's wife, kind of just getting out there and just kind of sending resumes out and kind of reaching out. But it is really good to reach out to a career center in your area and really work with a career coach, because it may be something with a little bit of training and a little bit of kind of assistance. You may be able to not only get a similarly salaried position, but you may be able to move up a little bit as well, or move sideways a little bit. So that's another recommendation as well. But Kyle, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us
anytime.
today.
My pleasure. Anytime.
And that wraps up our episode for today. I'd like to thank Kyle for his time and expertise. We hope that you can join us for our next live webinar. For more information on upcoming webinars, visit our website at www.consumercredit.com. You can also check us out on social media. If you like this episode of Money Matters, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We would love to hear your thoughts and suggestions for upcoming webinars and podcasts. Feel free to leave a comment below. Thanks for listening, and remember to keep your money smart and your dreams big.